Okay, I'm gonna get started. Hopefully you can see the cover that says Mind Management to Improve Mental Health. And I don't think anyone else is on the call, but I'm gonna get started and so everyone can have this as a recording. Um, Hopefully everyone can hear me. That's my only concern, without having any feedback. But it is recording. Um, So if you do happen to come in, you can leave a comment in the chat or leave a reaction or something to let me know that you're here. And if you have any questions, put a 1 in the chat. It's always just an easy way to know if anyone has a question, and I'll check the chat before I log off. But yeah, I gave this presentation at Thrive 2026, the Mind Body Optimization Summit a couple weeks ago, and so I thought I would just share it here. I'm a licensed professional counselor, a yoga teacher, and alcohol-free lifestyle coach. And this presentation wasn't specifically for an audience for sobriety or recovery, but because I'm an alcohol-free lifestyle coach, I did incorporate that in, and I'm going to do as much tying in as I can to living alcohol-free and cultivating an identity to live alcohol-free. So um, I'd like to just offer just a focal point, just that you can carry through this whole message. So hopefully you have something that you can, like something substantial that you can take away from this training. And that is that I believe that the mind is like a wild horse that can be tamed. It can be made more agitated, but it can also be made calm. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here just to introduce myself. I've been working in health and fitness for as long as I can remember. I owned a personal training studio in Middleton, Massachusetts called Fitness Together. And this little guy is my son, who is now the one in the middle here, almost 19. So that shows just how long I've been involved in health and fitness. I love health and fitness, and that's actually part of my sobriety story and journey, which I'll get to in a later slide. Here's the introduction. What is good mental health? And like I said, I gave this presentation at Thrive 2026 Mind and Body Optimization Summit, not necessarily about sobriety or recovery, but it got me thinking, what is good mental health? And it's such an interesting question because it's not something that I think about very often, even as a mental health clinician. I think in terms of symptoms and diagnosing and treatment planning and how to help a client function in their everyday lives. But something as simple as, what is good mental health and how do you know when your mental health is in a good place? That was kind of the basis for this presentation. So just something to think about, maybe take a few mental notes. And I want to be clear that this presentation is for educational purposes only. I'm not talking about a cure for mental illness or anything diagnosable, but even common diagnoses like anxiety and depression can be eased by our understanding of our nervous system and how to manage our mind. So today we're going to explore mind management as a way to cultivate clarity, adaptability, and inner steadiness, even when conditions are less than ideal, aka stressful. So there's no wrong answers, but I like to think that these are some widely accepted answers to what is good mental health. And that is adaptability, flexibility, finding ease in the discomfort of life, the capacity for regulation and recovery, and a sense of meaning, agency, and connection. And I think most people understand that happiness is fleeting. It's not a steady state. It comes and goes. It's great when it's there, and obviously if we can cultivate more happiness, it probably makes us more adaptable and flexible and gives us more ease in our everyday life. But I wouldn't say it's a sign of good mental health. Neither is positive thinking or no stress or no problems or no conflict. Um, it's just unrealistic. And it reminds me of the Truman Show. And, I asked the question in the presentation, like, how many of you would want to live in a perfectly controlled environment like Truman? And so most people, it might be nice for a little while, but eventually you're going to want to bust out of there, like Truman did. um, and so, by definition of stress, I think of stress as a difficulty adjusting to a circumstance. So, by definition, when we find ease and adaptability and flexibility with our stressors, we're generally in a much better place. So, to understand how we positively influence our mental health, we first need to understand our biology. And by biology, I mean our nervous system. And everyone and their mom is talking about nervous system regulation, but for good reason. So, I'm going to move to the next slide. Our primitive brains, our brains are not wired for happiness, they're wired for survival. Most people probably realize that by now. So the nervous system is comprised of the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which are the motor and sensory neurons. And for today's topic, I'm going to be talking about the peripheral nervous system, the involuntary or autonomic system, and that's the sympathetic, the parasympathetic, and the enteric is the part of the gut, but we're not going to talk about that today, although I do believe the gut is super important to mental health because it's connected to our vagus nerve, which is called the wandering nerve that transmits information from our brain to our gut. So super important, but a little bit out of my scope, so we're not going to really talk about that today. But sympathetic nervous system, most people know as fight or flight. Our brains really can't tell the difference between a real or perceived threat. So if we have some kind of threat, a stressor is technically a threat, it'll activate this sympathetic nervous system. So you can see here in the green, your heart beats faster, your breath is fast and shallow, your pupils expand, your gut becomes inactive, which we're going to talk about that in a second. Blood rushes to your skeletal muscles and away from your brain, making it harder to think clearly. Hormones are rushing through your body and it expends a lot of energy. And thank goodness that we have this system. I think it's important to recognize that we're not, saying this is a bad thing. We just want to make sure that we're finding balance between our sympathetic and our parasympathetic. So one of the best ways that I remember the rest and digest, as the teacher said, when we're being chased by a lion, which is a perceived threat or a real threat, sorry, or any real or perceived threat, we don't need to digest a burrito. So think of all of the good things that are happening in the purple is going offline when we're in our sympathetic nervous system. So, like I was saying, unfortunately, our brains can't distinguish between a real or imagined threat. And for example, if I tell you, don't think of a pink elephant, what happens? You think of the pink elephant. So energy goes, or energy flows where attention goes, I think is the saying. Whatever you focus on, you give power to, making it grow in your life. So your body is quite literally going to respond to what you're thinking about. So what do you think happens when we say stuck or in a fight or flight response? All this stuff that I mentioned in the green. We're going to skip to that in the next window, but I want to mention heart rate variability. If anyone's ever heard of heart rate variability, it is an indication of the balance between the two states, which, it's telling me that I need to address something in the tab here. Let me see. And yes, I'm still here. It's probably because I'm recording to myself. It's thinking that no one is here. Someone's messaging that they can't make it. Okay. All right. Back to presentation mode. What happened? Sorry, guys. I gotta adjust all these things again. Okay, here we are. We're back. I was talking about heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is indicates the balance between these two systems, and a higher heart rate variability, the better. It indicates more stress resilience. So if anyone's got a heart rate, I don't know if I think Apple Watch might do it, but there's a lot of ways to measure your heart rate variability. So, window of tolerance is a great tool to recognize when you're dysregulated. Hyperarousal is the flight and hypoarousal is the freeze. And so you can take a look at the screen, and I encourage you to just give yourself a little self-assessment to see what your dominant state is and how often you're in your window of tolerance, and also how long it takes you to return to your window of tolerance if you've gotten out of it into hyperarousal and hypoarousal. And this is where alcohol comes in, because it narrows our window of tolerance. I mean, I think most people understand when you are intoxicated, it's probably the most times that you've gotten into an argument, or when you're hungover, you have very, very little tolerance for anything. So just an example of how alcohol is very disruptive to the nervous system. So let's go to the next slide. So what I was saying about, what do you think happens if you stay stuck in a chronic sympathetic state? And all of this good stuff in our prefrontal lobe, our executive function, goes offline, which is very important. Deciding what to say before you say it, challenging negative thoughts, pausing before reacting, weighing consequences, choosing what aligns with values. We don't need any of this when we're being chased by a lion. It's like irrelevant to our body, but very important because we don't live in that kind of world anymore. We need to be able to stay online. Brene Brown talks about going offline, and I just think that's just a good way to remember, like, we want to stay online. Because when we don't have access to these things, we're not very adaptable or flexible or finding ease in the discomfort of life. We are just in reptilian brain. Okay, so good mental health starts with understanding our stress response and stress resilience. So how do we do it? How do we do that? Let's walk through it. So stressors, think about the last time you were stressed, activate our stress response. And I can almost guarantee that your thoughts were involved in there somehow. Either they started the stressor or they reacted to the stressor. So our thoughts become things. What we think about and believe, our brains are constantly looking for evidence of that. It's our reticular activating system. So paying attention to your thoughts is really important in observing our thoughts, which we're going to talk about in later slides. But stress, rumination, worry, overthinking, struggling to accept reality, wanting things to be different than they are. In the Eightfold Buddhist Path, they talk about a relentless craving for things to be other than they are. That adds to our stress and provokes our stress response. Expectations of ourselves, others, and outcomes. Lack of resources. I mean, this is a real threat. Money, food, time, safety, connection. I put connection on the list because I do believe, as a therapist, I'm fascinated by attachment theory, and I do believe that attachment is quite primitive. Meaning, if you think about hundreds or thousands of years ago, if you didn't have an attachment figure, you would quite literally die. So attachment can be, and having a safe, secure attachment or attachments can activate our parasympathetic nervous system, but also just reduce the stress response. So yeah, thinking about the last time you were really stressed, and then thinking about what your executive function was like during that stressful period. Were you able to think clearly? Were you able to problem solve or reason or make decisions? is probably much harder. So here's another example of executive function, a little bit more in depth. Um, so we don't make good decisions. It's more difficult to find a solution. We're less self-aware. There's more reactivity and impulsivity, less empathy, which probably would cause more increased interpersonal conflict, lack of focus, and lack of reasoning. So again, without these abilities, it's pretty hard to have the good mental health that in my definition, I talked about earlier, the adaptability, flexibility, capacity for regulation and recovery, a sense of meaning, agency, and connection. So back to the window of tolerance, like how do we maintain and return to our window of tolerance? I say it takes practice, practice, practice. Um, I also say nothing sits still. Anything in our lives is constantly in a state of flux. And so, one day you might get it, and the next day it's like a step forward and two steps back, or two steps forward and a step back. That's a normal. Don't be discouraged. It just takes practice to observe and manage your thoughts. I also think that managing stress is bidirectional, meaning that the more adaptable and flexible we are at our baseline, the bigger or wider our window of tolerance is. At baseline, the less likely we are to be provoked by perceived or even real threat, because we're already flexible and adaptable and curious, centered and grounded. So even when there are no stressors, we want to be cultivating a window of tolerance, um, so that when those stressors come, we can, do the same thing. We can, be observing and managing our thoughts, calling off the alarm, letting our bodies know that we are safe. And we're going to talk about activating the parasympathetic nervous system, but part of the letting your body know that there is no real threat, or just even assessing the threat sometimes based on temperament, and that's where it's like a gene by environment interaction. You could have a temperament, or you could have a sensitivity that makes you more reactive, but with practice you can learn to change that. Finding acceptance in what is and adjusting the expectation reality gap. So let's look at the parasympathetic nervous system, which actually I think I threw in this slide, because these are disruptions to the nervous system, which alcohol is first on the list for me. As an alcohol-free lifestyle coach, if you just do this one thing, take alcohol out, you will have a better chance of regulating your nervous system. I put processed foods and refined sugars on here, but it was a mind-body summit, so we were talking about health and nutrition, but this is on the list for me because I do believe that a lot of food sensitivities look like mental health symptoms, like fatigue, irritability, and lethargy. So food can actually slow down our digestion. It can do all kinds of things to make us feel pretty miserable. And then once we feel miserable, it changes the way that we think and our self-talk. And then once that gets going, it just further perpetuates the problem. Same with resentment. Resentment is, the saying, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. You're drinking that emotional charge for a fight or a disagreement, so you're just activating your sympathetic nervous system with any kind of resentment. I say prolonged fear, real or imagined, because again, good thing we have our stress response. We want to keep it. We want to keep that balance between the two states. But if we stay stuck, that's when it becomes a problem. So Dr. Huberman, he has a Huberman lab, but he's also a neuroscientist and a professor at Stanford School of Medicine. and he is the expert on what alcohol does to the brain. You know, I know that it disrupts executive function, like we've talked about, emotional regulation, motor control, we know, self-regulation and decision making, especially for relationships with children. Um, a big part of raising children is co-regulating and attuning. And when alcohol is involved, it's nearly impossible to do that. So even if there are not any crazy consequences, um, you feel like maybe you're not, you know, yelling or doing anything terrible in your relationship, there's a real possibility that you're not able to attune or co-regulate with your children. So this QR code goes directly to Dr. Huberman's like podcast. It'll show you everything where he talks about alcohol. If you really want to understand what's going on in the brain, because it's very complex. So you can check that out. So now we're talking about supporting the parasympathetic nervous system. And honestly, I could just say yoga and leave it at that. Deep breathing is a part of yoga, stimulating the vagus nerve. Like I talked about the wandering nerve, the brain gut superhighway. Also, yoga works on stimulating the vagus nerve, gut health, not necessarily yogic philosophy, although Ayurveda is a sister philosophy to yoga. And so, you know, gut health is very important. Nadi Shodhana is alternate nostril breathing that comes from yoga. Meditation, mindfulness comes from yoga. But connection and bonding is on the list for me, like I was saying about attachment theory being super important to our sense of safety. Hormones like oxytocin are released with a hug, or just it's the bonding hormone that can help us feel safe and calm our nervous system. So that's on the list for me. Creating an environment with less stressors. Honestly, I could talk about this all day. This is probably one of the most challenging things to work with in someone's life. Let's see, because it's just not fun to have to make a lot of really difficult decisions when it comes to how you manage your environment. But if you've heard of the study about Rat Park, I can't remember who did the study, but you know, when the rats were given these, you know, barren environments, they were more prone to addiction versus when they had lots of things to play with and lots of other rats to bond with, and you know, they had a lush environment. They didn't go for the addictive substances. So it's probably the least popular way to manage the urge for alcohol, but I do think it's incredibly important. So something I actually didn't mention, which is the reason I posted this picture, is because this is probably one of the most amazing Shavasana experiences. And maybe I should go to the next slide because it has it on there too. But I don't know if it was Samadhi, the integration or union, but I've never felt more at peace than in this moment. And this isn't exactly Shavasana in this picture. This is just for representation purposes. But this particular day, I came home from yoga class, and alcohol could never touch this moment. It was so incredible. But the reason I kind of want to harp on it is because I also wouldn't want to live here. You know, as beautiful as this moment was, it felt so good. I would never get anything done if I felt this still and this calm and this peaceful. So I do think it's important to recognize that, again, that we need a balance between the two, like I've mentioned. But yeah, this is the 8-limbed path. And I think it's so valuable when it comes to breaking up with alcohol, because it focuses on like how we respond to ourselves internally and externally. Um, the postures are a very minimal part of yoga, but they help us get into postures that, we want to get out of. They're not always that comfortable, but my teacher always says that the yoga begins when you want to get out of a pose. So they are important to helping us learn how to find ease in the discomfort and tolerate what is, accepting what is. So I just think yoga is such a great way. Yoga is my recovery program, which you may have seen on my Instagram. I talk about quite a bit. Um, but yeah, we'll move on to the alcohol-free journey. Choosing to live alcohol-free is the entrance point to the path. And I think this is important because, well, one, the path is not, it's not an easy path. Making the decision is great, but it takes a really long time to feel good in sobriety. And I think I say that because I want to be honest, because I don't think people talk enough about it. They talk about how like great and even magical it is. And in some ways it is, yes. I mean, you feel really proud of yourself and you're doing something good for yourself, but your body has to recover and to recalibrate and um, you know, increase the heart rate variability and dopamine receptors need to get back into balance or whatever they do. The gut, everything needs to be restored, and that takes quite a long time. So choosing the path is just like one bit of it, and then walking the path is where all of the adaptability and flexibility and finding ease in the discomfort, cultivating a new identity. This is where the work begins. And just like you go to a personal trainer when you need help, persisting through the hard parts, that's what a coach is for. Because making the decision to remove alcohol is just the beginning. Um, it's an uncomfortable road. You can expect discomfort. Nothing strange or unusual is happening. And this is really important to go back to your why you're choosing to let go of alcohol and having a strong enough internal reason. Because, let's be honest, you don't have to. Um, I hope that there is a big enough why in your life to make this decision, because once you get to the other side, and that's the thing, the only way out is through, and it does take some time. I guess everyone's different, but you got to have some grit and persistence and some heavy lifting. So let's see. Did I miss anything? Yeah. So optimizing your mind and body. This was really for the summit. But like I said, removing alcohol, I mean, honestly, just improves your mind and body so much. Practicing nervous system regulation, maintaining your window of tolerance, observing your thoughts, accepting what is. Quality sleep we didn't really talk about, but removing alcohol will automatically improve your sleep, and by like you might be getting the same amount of hours, but um, deeper REM sleep will improve. And that's where, all of the repair happens in the deeper REM sleep. Move your body till it sweats. I worked in personal training before becoming a therapist, and I like to think that exercise is just play for grown-ups. So get out there and play. Move your body till it sweats. Um, Posture is on the list, but I didn't go into that today. That was something for the event. And I say, and then some, because there's so many different ways to, in perspectives to improve your health. There's so many different ways to approach living alcohol free. I mean, the recovery model, like AA, has the market, I guess. I don't know, like, is like the number one thing that people think of when they think about sobriety and recovery, but I didn't resonate with traditional models, and I believe that we are more powerful than we give ourselves credit. So I don't resonate with the powerless idea. Um, I think I'm far more powerful, and so I've taken a different approach. So there are lots of different ways. If AA works for you, go for it, do that. But if it doesn't, just know that you're not alone. And then this last part, what I was saying in the beginning, that focal point is, the mind is a wild horse that can be tamed. It's our job to figure that out. So like I was saying about the environment not being a very popular approach, but it really is our job to figure out an environment that is conducive for us to thrive. And sometimes that requires some really difficult changes that need to be made, but reducing those stressors will reduce the urge for alcohol. Um, and you can think of alcohol as a irritant or agitating to the wild horse. So just by removing it, you'll be able to calm the wild horse. But again, it's up to you to figure out what is causing the agitation and how to reduce it. So, that's it for this presentation. This QR code will take you to all of the ways you can contact me or ask questions or engage. Um, I am um, enrolling for a program called the Alcohol Free Advantage. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, I'm doing a beta round for 3 or 4 clients, keeping it really small. And the beta round is really a testing round. So if you're interested, there is a link here to schedule a consultation, a free consultation. There's no obligation to join at all. Like, anyone is welcome to do this 45-minute call. I'm happy to do it. Like I said, I'm a licensed professional counselor, but I'm switching into alcohol-free lifestyle coaching. So this is, a passion project for me. And honestly, um, you all out there, whoever's listening and is getting something from this information, is what keeps me going, because this is, what got me to really engage and stay focused and persist down the difficult path, is knowing that other people are trying to find freedom from the grips of alcohol and the billion-dollar industry that is profiting off of our sickness and pain. So I'm here for anyone that is looking for help to break up with alcohol, like a toxic ex that you have a hard time getting rid of. There's a lot of grief involved. There's a lot of things can come up when it comes, like, for me, it was betrayal. Like, I thought alcohol was my friend. um, it was like my go-to comfort, and then I could no longer use it anymore. So there are so many different ways that alcohol can get into our internal world. So reach out if I can do anything to help. I will, and send me an email or comment. Let me know if you have any questions. Okay, I'm going to see if anyone's in the chat. I don't think so, because I didn't hear anyone come in. Wait. Nope. Okay. Bye.